Maybe I should start by saying being out of social media for a while has been a deliberate choice. I mean, there's a lot of noise on social media, but while I have always said the social media is a very, very important tool towards achieving our aims, sometimes it can also be very dangerous. And I keep saying it's like fire. If you've got control over it, you can make a lot out of it. If it gets out of control, then it can burn you. And I think sometimes staying out of social media is a way of ensuring that we gain control of what we are doing and rather focus on the work that needs to be done. Now, coming to your question specifically about the dialogue, so-called dialogue organized by Yaoundé, I think everybody knows that it was a farce. We always knew that it was a farce. It was always going to be. Even for those who went in very much in favor of the process, most of them came out very disappointed. Akeremuna, who else? There's quite a few of them who came out very disappointed. Firstly, because the foundation was wrong. Secondly, there was no will or willingness on the part of Yaoundé to actually organize anything that will end up in finding solutions. And we know that the reason for organizing the so-called dialogue was more in order to pull the wool over the eyes of the international community and say, see what I'm doing. Immediately afterwards, we saw the photos of Mr. Biya and Mr. Macron of France bodyboarding, just saying everything is fine. We knew it was never going to go anywhere, and of course it didn't. And that's why we never honored, and personally, I never even bothered to respond to the calls and the invitations to be part of the meeting. The Fumban conference was within a framework. There was a framework that came from pre-independence that said you have two territories, two trusteeships of the United Nations, which are going to have a meeting to talk about how they're going to move forward in terms of their neighborly relations. Are we going to have a relationship in which we exist as two separate countries? Are we going to have a relationship in which we're going to have some kind of federated system? Or are we going to have a relationship that says everybody looks in opposite direction? You with the Central African Monetary Region and us with the West African Monetary Region, or what is called ECOWAS today. Those were the fundamentals of what guided the Fumban Conference. Of course, we all know that it got hijacked for a whole lot of reasons, which we don't even need to get into, from the fact that we were a bit ill-prepared as well as the fact that the Yaoundé group was far more prepared and came with all the malicious intentions that you can think about. But it was within a framework, and it was within a legal and political framework. What happened in Yaoundé a couple of weeks ago was a comedy. There was no framework. There was nothing, no preparation. There was no willingness, nothing to show that these people know what they're doing. When you look at the number of invitations I received, I think I received about 4 or 5 different invitations via email. All of them coming from different actors, from the presidency, from the office of the prime minister, from a whole lot of people. It tells you already that they were not organized. It tells you that they didn't know what they were doing. There was no framework. There was no terms of reference. I've always said this, for every major conversation of that nature, one of the first things you want to put in place is to put in place the terms of reference. What are we going to discuss? On what basis? What do we want to achieve? There was nothing. So it was just trying to pull this wool over the eyes of people. It was a comedy. It was a comedy show, and it turned out to be a comedy show in the true sense, because we saw the people who went there with all the hopes came back with their hopes dashed. And I'm not surprised. I wouldn't be surprised that a whole lot of the people who went in there on the basis of wanting to be federalized would come out even hardened and more left-leaning than they were before. Special status. It's an insult. What drives me mad every time this Yaoundé regime, and I don't want to globalize the problem. I don't want to generalize and say the Francophones or the East Cameroonians and so on. I want to be specific about the wolves who are in control of this regime in Yaoundé. It is the arrogance, the sheer arrogance of thinking that they can arrogate upon themselves the right to allocate to us what they think is good for us. That's an insult. You're calling people to have a conversation. And one of the things you're saying is, we understand, or at least they pretend not to understand. But that's why I'm saying it was a comedy. This whole thing of a special status was in itself a comedy. Well, not just a comedy, it was an insult to us. And I'm thankful that for the most of our compatriots, nobody even bothered to pay it any heed. Because if any of us had participated in such a meeting and came out with a resolution that said, we're going to give you special status, the question is, who are you to give us a status? We are supposed to be having a conversation among equals, at the end of which we decide where we want to go. You sit in your monologue and you decide that you're going to give me a special status. That's why it's the only thing that has changed is the fact that Mr. Biya has managed to ingratiate himself to the master. But that's the only thing that changed. Apart from that, the status quo remains. And that's why this whole thing of a special status is as good as the Commission on multilingualism and culturalism and something. This man is good at coming up with all kinds of terminology, none of which ever sees the light of day. So we know nothing is going to come out of that. I have often said, and I think I've said this several times, even to a whole lot of friends, Francophone friends who approach me and say, let's just find a way to move forward. The thing I've always said is, if you do not go back to the problem, you cannot find a solution. So whatever you found as a solution without actually going back to address the problem is bound to fail. So whatever they put in place is not going to yield any results. So first step, let's go back to the drawing board and ask ourselves, where did we come from? Let's acknowledge the problem. Let's acknowledge our status of being two states, trusteeships of the United Nations that gained their independence 2 years almost apart, one on the 1st of January 1960 and the other on the 1st of October 1961, and say, we've got these two entities. Now, where do we want to go from here? Now, that is the kind of conversation that we are willing to have. Whatever comes out of that conversation is going to be based on the will of the Southern Cameroonian. But having known the bad faith that this regime has perpetrated and has manifested over the past almost 60 years, we doubt that anything fruitful will ever come out of such a conversation. And that is the reason why we have moved, long ago we've moved from the premise that, oh, let's find ways of fixing this, and saying, you know what, sometimes it works better when we go our separate ways. And that, for me, is what I think would work. Well, the strongest opposition party, I don't know about that. The SDF used to be one of, in fact, the most powerful political party in that triangle called Cameroon then. And I say the most powerful. Unfortunately, that has died over time. Now, and sometimes I get the feeling that the SDF is clutching at straws. It is drowning, and in the process of drowning, it clutches at whatever straws it can in order to stay alive and to stay relevant. The proposal of the Quebec-style solution to our problem is a non-starter. Like I said, it's based on the fact, if you look at Canada and the way the Quebecois did not get to the point they got to because they were deprived of everything. On the contrary, they were given so much. That's why they were even willing to listen. At the very beginning of this outburst of our people in 2016, I had written an article which was entitled, "Make Unity Attractive." This was in line with the words of John Garang in South Sudan at the time, when there was a clamor for the South and the North of Sudan to stay together. John Garang had said, yes, we are not against the idea of staying together. We are not against the idea of unity. but for us to stay in this relationship, make it attractive. The action and the reactions of the BR regime from 2016 until today has not shown, there's not one shred of evidence that this regime is willing to find any solution. From the declaration of war against our people, burning down of over 300 villages, displacement of close to 1 million of our people, children not going to school for 3 years, everything. There is a deliberate disenfranchisement, what is being called a genocide, taking place on our territory. Now, once you've gone through this kind of experience, be it South Sudan, be it Eritrea, Timor-Leste, and so on, there is no desire whatsoever of wanting to find some kind of solution that keeps you together. The bitterness, I think almost every single one of us have suffered some kind of fate or another in the negative since this revolution started. People have lost relatives, people have lost jobs, they've lost their businesses and so on. Who would want to be part of a system which, first of all, will not be able to compensate you tomorrow, even if we said, yeah, finally we found a solution. I was running a business for this amount and I lost my business as a result. This is what I need in order to kickstart my business and in the process contribute to the economy. None. We know the regime is broke. It doesn't have anything. So that too is another actor that is clutching at straws. And that is why, from a SCCOP perspective, we have taken the decision that as part of our end of year gift to the regime, we will be helping to further crumble the economy of that regime. Something we're working on, and that should be out soon. It is a reality. 5 years ago, 10 years ago, where we are today would have been inconceivable. We know the game that France is playing, but at the end of the day, our freedom as a people does not depend on France. The people of Eritrea, at some point somebody said, forget about it, you're never going to gain your independence. The people of South Sudan, at some point somebody said, forget about it, then you're never going to get your independence. There are people who say that today. They say that today about us and about our quest to gain our independence. With each passing day, the Yaoundé regime is helping us realize our ambition and our dream. So I am very confident about what the future holds for us, regardless of the role that France plays or whoever plays. The question, first of all, is what is special status? You know, you need to, these things, very often you need to, I keep saying you need to put it within a framework. You need to sit down and come up with terms of reference. What exactly do you want to achieve? And before you come up with what you want to achieve, you need to go back and ask yourself, what is the problem? What was the problem? How do we solve this problem? Before you start finding a solution. The problem with our friends in Yaoundé is this tendency to bury their head in sand and then decide that, okay, we're going to do whatever. And you might recall quite a few years ago when I led a demonstration at the Pan-African Parliament, there was this woman who came in from Cameroon who later came to us and said, oh, you know, I know you are a bunch of young people who are hungry. I know all you need is, we just need to find a little bit of something and give to you and everything will be fine. That's the mentality of these people. It's the mentality that says, we are where we are because we sold out, we are hungry, and we were given something. You know, one of the ministers who was a strong advocate of our struggle, 2 years ago, a lawyer, Momo or something, and then as soon as he got appointed a minister, what happened? His language changed. You're talking about a people who have got a culture that has got no conscience. I know that amongst our people, there are lots of people who have learned, and some of them quite hardened in that culture, but there is still the fundamentals of who we are. And that is why this whole thing of, if we were given the chance to put in place a special status, then perhaps nothing would change. You don't have a foundation, you cannot build a house. The idea of a special status is an insult. Is an insult, and it makes me angry because of the sheer arrogance of these people to think that they can sit there and say, oh, you know what, we know your problem. All we need to do is give you a special status. Not one single one of them has been able to define what it means, a special status. Even what they talk about Quebec in Canada, none of them. Sometimes you get the feeling these guys don't even understand. Oh, je suis républicain. But what does it mean to be a Republican? Most of them don't know. They don't know. So you're dealing with a bunch of people, you're dealing with a bunch of charlatans. People who have got no clue. When you talk about a special status, what exactly are you talking about? How does that work? If you look at the special status of Wales in the UK, it comes within a framework. It comes from a history over time. So there are terms of reference that guide the special status of some of this country. The problem with our experts in most of this comedy that they're playing is that they go into the playbook of some country and they borrow a term and they come and apply it. But when you ask them, can you break this down so it makes sense? Nothing. They've got no clue what they're talking about. So we cannot, back to your question, we cannot be trying to find a solution to a problem, or we cannot be trying to define and trying to improve a terminology of something that is none of our business. So that is for them to do. Whatever special status is, let them handle it with their boys. We know what we want. We are very, very clear about what we want, and that's the route we are pursuing. Okay, let me be clear, because I've said this a number of times, but let me say it again, and I know I'll be saying a lot more of this in the coming days. The Swiss, I think I made a video at some point saying, when you go into negotiations, you cannot afford to go into negotiations from a position of weakness. You want to go into negotiations from a position of strength. I said that. But at the same time, at no point does anybody go into negotiations when they're 100% ready. The only reason you negotiate is because you realize that you cannot achieve everything you want, and that the other party realizes also that they cannot achieve everything they want. As a result, you find ways of meeting each other at some point. Is it going to be midway, 3/4 of the way right, or 3/4 of the way left? Depends on the stakes that you hold. That's how negotiations work. So, number one, that has been my strong argument. Number two is the fact that I do not believe that the Yaoundé regime is willing or ready to negotiate. As a result, SCCOP's position and its decision to be part of this process has been for completely different reasons. And I find it a bit sad that most of our people do not see this, and we are letting go of opportunities which have been gifted to us. One, since 1972, let's say 1984, prior to that we had the likes of Professor Fonlon already advocating. But since 1984, when Fon Gorji Dinka decided to declare our separation officially from the Yaoundé regime, or the other way around, when Mr. Biya decided to secede from whatever they had perceived to be a united Republic of Cameroon, our people have been clamoring for the international community to step in and find ways of giving us that recognition which we've never had, right? Now, 30 years down the line, after losing, 10,000 people, 1 million people in exile, or at least displaced, schools burnt, villages burnt, and so on, we finally find an international stakeholder that steps up and says, listen, I realize that you've got a problem, and this problem has got two sides. There is the one side which is represented by the Yaoundé regime, and there is the other that represents the southern Cameroonian people. And we want to step in and help you find a solution to that problem. Now, what has just happened is that after 30 years of struggling to get somebody to say, hey, two people are fighting, let's step in, we finally achieved that. Something the British are not even willing to recognize that such a thing is existing. The French are fighting against it. The Americans have pretended. Everybody around the world pretends that there is a fight between two separate parties. And the narrative that has been out there for the past 30 years has been, oh, don't worry, it's an internal problem, we're going to fix it, just leave it to us. Finally, we've achieved that. We finally got a player that says, there is something wrong here. We've got two separate units that are in conflict, and we need to find ways of resolving it. That's victory number one. It's a major victory that we just achieved. And for us to cement that victory, we need to push and get this to be documented and be part and parcel of the narrative that we're going to talk about a year or two from today. So that's reason number one, that we stepped in there and we think it's vital that we are in there. Reason number two is that when you step in there, you're pushing the Yaoundé regime to be on the defensive. And what is that defensive? We have always known this regime is not willing to negotiate. It doesn't want to talk. It doesn't want to find solutions. It continues to pretend that there is no problem. It's an internal problem. Now it's been pushed to the point where it says it's got one of two choices. It either says, you know what, we never agreed that there was going to be any kind of discussion, any kind of talks. We have never promised anything to the Swiss, so we don't care. That's good, because by so doing, they are saying we are not interested in solutions. And it now pits the Yaoundé regime against the international community. That's one. Or the Yaoundé regime says, yes, actually, we asked you to mediate for us. We need to find solutions. Then what that does is that it forces the Yaoundé regime to show good faith. For us to find any solution to this, we need to go back to our history. We need to go back and have questions around where did we come from? What were the agreements? You say there is a union between these two territories. Can you show us a treaty of union between the two? International law starts to apply. And it puts Yaoundé on the back foot. That's the second thing. So we know that it will expose Yaoundé if it comes to the table. And it will expose Yaoundé even further if it refuses to come to the table. It is no coincidence, therefore, that you find a Yaoundé regime decides to go and organize a national dialogue while there is a Swiss process going on. What is it trying to do? If it believed in the Swiss process, it wouldn't have done that. But it is carrying out this comedy with the hope that the Swiss process will fizzle out. Now we have a major opportunity here. What I find interesting is that a lot of our brothers and sisters are also running, while the Yaoundé regime is running away from it, we are also advocating and say, let's run away from it. Oh, we don't trust the Swiss. Of course, nobody trusts the Swiss, but the Swiss do not trust us. They are not in this because they love us. They are in this because they find opportunities. But remember that we are not talking about the Swiss government alone. Who is putting the money for these meetings to take place? It's not Switzerland, it's Canada. Then you have the backing of other countries. So at the end of the process, and back to your question, SCCOP has been part of the talks, but SCCOP is part of the talks because we see opportunities beyond Facebook backstabbing and blaming and cursing and everything. We don't play that game. We understand that where we are right now, we are on the international stage with major actors. And the point we are trying to make, what do we want to achieve at the end of this, is to ensure that these major actors get to see the reality. At the end of this process, what do I think will be achieved? Number one, do I believe that the Swiss-led process is going to produce results with negotiations at this stage? No, I don't think so. But the question is, what do we want to achieve out of it? That, for me, is what matters. At the end of the day, we would have gained international sympathy. We would have gained the sympathy of the international world for those who get to understand our issues a bit more, to say, now we understand what you've been talking about all these years. This regime is not serious. We think that you've got every right to defend yourself. We need to think. The problem with our people is the tendency to say, if you are doing something, if it's not being led by me, I must do everything in my power to sabotage it. That's what we are doing. That's what I've heard anyway, because I haven't had the time to sit and follow a lot of these conversations. But it's sad. It's sad what our people are doing to opportunities that are presenting themselves to us. Now, this is where we come in, and this is what SCCOP is doing. You would have noticed that SCCOP has not been following these discussions like a blind person just going wherever it goes. SCCOP has been asking questions. So what we are doing is putting everybody in difficulty. Say, yes, Switzerland or HD, humanitarian dialogue. You say you want to help us mediate, but where are the terms of reference? Right? We're asking those questions. On the one hand, you're saying you're trying to find mediation. On the other, the Yaoundé regime is condemning our compatriots to life imprisonment. So what kind of influence what kind of sway do you hold over this Yaoundé regime? What are you doing? Can you for sure tell us that the Yaoundé regime has indeed committed to be part of the process. We've seen our brother, Abdul Karim, on leaving the talks in Switzerland, arrives in Cameroon, gets picked up and jailed. So now something is not right here. And so what we are doing as SCCOP is beginning to ask those questions. But remember that at this stage, and this is what a lot of people are not saying, no talks have started. What they are having so far, at least to the best of my understanding, are the talks prior to the talks. They're saying, what framework do we want to put in place? How do we want to put this framework? And that is why as SCCOP, we even had issues with the fact that out of nowhere, there was the formation of something called ACT or ACT. The question is, what is the framework? What are the terms of reference? How did you get to this point? And so we question things because we see, on the one hand, like I say, we've seen opportunities, but on the other, we are very worried of what is taking place there. And we want to ensure that we do not blindly follow this process and then find ourselves in a deep hole from which we cannot come. So it's a very fine line that we are treading, but that is what international relations is all about. Switzerland is treading a fine line. Everybody is looking after their interest. Our interest should be looking after the interest of our people and ask those key questions that would help us to play the international community in its own game. I think, once again, that's what I talked about, the ACT. The fact that we had, SCCOP went into these talks knowing that we are still talking about the talks before the talks. And then the next thing is we see that the delegates at the conference or at the meeting have been made to sign the formation of, what is it called? An Ambazonia coalition team. So the question is, what is the framework? What are the terms of reference? And all those questions that we asked in the letter that went out and the position that we took as SCCOP. And it's based on that that we decided, no, we are going to rescind our signature. It was ill-informed. The beauty about negotiation processes is that you go in, you send representatives, you have the right to withdraw if you feel like the process is not going the way you want. I have made it very clear that I put the blame squarely on the humanitarian dialogue in this case. And I try to distinguish between the Swiss government as a government and humanitarian dialogue as an organization that has been hired to facilitate the process. And I say the blame is that of humanitarian dialogue. Why? Prior to going to this meeting, at least delegates should have been informed that, listen, as you come to this meeting, prepare yourself. We're going to put in place a framework, or we're going to put in place some kind of a platform that starts to consolidate. So when you come, these are the terms of reference of it. This is how it's going to be. This is the structure. Prior to the structure, this is the strategy. None of those things were put in place. To this day, we haven't seen what this is all about. So as SCCOP, we felt that they were putting the cart before the horse. And as a result, we rescinded our signature. Until these things are rectified, we will hold back our signature. The revolution 1 year from today. I like that question. You remember, maybe you do, in 2017, when I sat down and crafted a 3-year strategy for our revolution. There are those who said they wanted to land us in Buea on the 1st of October. And they said, you see, Millan doesn't want us to go to Buea by the 1st of October 2017. That's why he's crafting a 3-year plan for the revolution. And I said, even if we won complete victory on the 1st of October 2017, we would still, the negotiation process is a long way. South Sudan signed the Comprehensive Peace Agreement in 2005. It only had its referendum vote in 2011, 6 years after the signing of the Comprehensive Peace Agreement. So your question about where we would be 2 years or a year from today, I think is a very important question. You see a lot of mudslinging and backstabbing and everything because a lot of people thought this thing would be overnight. It doesn't work that way. It's not going to be in our case that it works. The Israelis took 40 years wandering across the desert to finally reach the promised land. So sometimes we need to exercise patience, but we also need to exercise a bit of logical thinking to get to where we want to be. So where we're going to be in a year's time, I can't say with clarity. But I can tell you for sure that I'm hoping that we've learned lessons over the past 2 or 3 years, all the mistakes we've made to get us where we are. There are things we could have avoided. And if we had avoided them, we would be far better, in a far better position than we are today. But this is the nature of revolutions. They are never a straight line. It's always going around, navigating around obstacles, falling into deep pits, crawling out of them and finding a way forward. One thing I can tell you for sure is that things are changing very fast. Things are changing very fast. In a year's time, it's difficult to say where we are, but there is no doubt in my mind that we have achieved. If you remember the way as SCCOP, we've crafted our strategy, we've crafted our thinking. We had said the very first year of the revolution was going to be a year where we invest in social cohesion. This means getting our people who are not educated in our issues to start understanding what it is, go around the world, educate our people, meet our people, talk to them, get them to buy in. By the 22nd of September 2017, we had achieved that. That was a concrete goal, it was achieved. Second was the internationalization of our struggle. That should have taken place in 2018. Unfortunately, you know what happened in 2018. We lost our way completely. The leadership of the revolution got hijacked and it went into all directions and we lost 1 full year. We have only achieved internationalization this year, 2019, where the world begins to talk about our issues. The world is beginning to step in. You have the Swiss who are beginning to come on board and say, listen, we want to find solutions to this problem. But it did not start in 2018 or 2019. These conversations with the different entities, like I said the last time, already the European Union, when we visited Brussels in 2017, had said, we have already approached the Yaoundé regime and we've told them that we are willing to help if they are willing. So it's been a long process of building to the point where we have achieved internationalization. Now, we are now in a final phase. The question is, are we going to derail once again, or are we going to be focused on the goal? What I see taking place over the past weeks troubles me, because once again, many have not learned the lesson to say, I don't believe in the route you are taking, but I will focus on my route because I believe in it, and that will be what I focus on. The amount of energy people are putting into disparaging and disinforming other people's route is very troubling. And that is what troubles me. That one, people have not learned their lessons, and two, we still leave the wolves who have always played this role of misinformation and disinformation to continue doing that. Question is, where does that leave us? Where is that leading us? I do not know. What I can tell you for sure is that as SCCOP, and even within SCCOP, I have to say there is a lot of derailment of several members who were thinking about the short term. We want to get into this thing because in 1 year's time, there's going to be positions we're going to jump. The moment they are not seeing it, you start seeing a lot of people playing mixed roles and multiple roles and so on, so on, and so on forth. That is normal. So we, as a movement, we know that our one focus should be the goal. All the drama that's happening around, you were asking your question at the very beginning was, we haven't been very present on social media. Is a lot of what's happening on social media. I find it to be useful. Useful how? Because it's a useful distraction. And while that distraction is ongoing, we are focusing on the steps that we have put in place for ourselves. We know where we are going and we are confident we will get there. The question is when? We do not know, because all the aces are not in our hands. We only have some, and we are holding tight to those. One of the first things that we've done is that we have engaged very robustly the Swiss government to say, and you've seen some of that in our writings, to say we find it very troubling that somebody could attend the talks in Switzerland and on going home they get arrested. That does not augur well for what Switzerland stands for and what Yaoundé purports to stand for. As a result, we're carrying out a lot of engagement behind the scenes and putting as much pressure as should be put. That's the one. The second is that I'm going to talk about his situation, Abdul Karim, later, but I think once again, the Yaoundé regime helps us every now and then. Every now and then, even when we get distracted by all the social media noise, the Yaoundé regime, out of its own folly, jumps in and hands something. By arresting Comrade Abdul Karim, it has committed a very, very big mistake, because it's now beginning to radicalize a certain segment of our society that in lots of ways was not so present in this revolution. And we need to capitalize on that. And that's what we're looking at, capitalizing on. So the regime is handing anticipate. I think by having taken that step, our comrade will come out only more radical than he went in. There is no doubt about that. But I need to also mention the fact that we need to continue to think about him, to reach out, show him whatever support we can, reach out to his family, and so on, because we know he is not going through a very, very good time. It's, when you think about our 10 comrades who spent the time they spent at SAID, they could at least count on each other for moral support. It's difficult when you're sitting there all on your own. That's as good as but solitary confinement. So we need to put him in our prayers and continue to engage and continue to apply pressure on the regime to release him. And so message of encouragement to him, to his family, like we've been doing, and continue to pray for him. But most of all, I think the message that needs to go to our people is that if we all put our efforts, we all engage in all the different corridors, be it diplomatic, legal, social, and so on, there is no doubt that our pressure would bring some results.
Who are holding the fort.
Yeah.
Do you have any words for them?
Well, there is always something to say. The first is that for our people who are displaced, especially those who are in Nigeria, I just want to reach out to them and continue to give the message that I've always given, to say, we understand your situation. We are doing our very best to give you support. And I think many of them know the work that SCCOP has been doing and SCCOP Women has been doing, supporting the women and the children and so on. Education remains a very, very important aspect of what we as SCCOP think that we need to support. I know that we are working very, very hard to find some kind of a solution to that, but we do not want to have a piecemeal solution to the education problem. For those who are on ground zero, internally displaced, it continues to be the most touching of them, because in lots of ways, we know that sometimes we cannot reach these people who are internally displaced, in spite of the fact that we know how much their needs are. We have tried to reach out to a few. We continue to do that through SCCOP Women and the other groups that are in place. There is work that is going on. We are able to help send some funds back home, which is good, because many of them are also now contributing to some of the SCCOP projects, based and thanks to the work that we're doing and the support that we are giving them. But I think it's not enough. Once again, it's not for me to say what people must do, but I think we must not relent our efforts in helping our people. One way of doing that, I've always said, is we need to look at our different small geographical, cultural areas and support through those cultural outlets, because then it's easier to do that than through a political outfit. So it's easier for me to make a contribution to people in my village who may be in need of support than me trying to do it through SCCOP, which will be seen as a political outfit, and in that way, support that could be given to our people then gets blocked. So we must look at the different avenues through which we can reach our people. I don't think enough of that is being done. I'm aware that there's a lot that's being done, but we can do more. And I would just want to reach out to our people and say, we continue to think of more creative ways of giving them support. There is always the issue of children going back to school. It's been 3 years, I think, almost, that children have not been to school. It remains a problem and a challenge for us. I know we had said, and we continue to say, yes, it doesn't matter, let them stay until we get our independence. The question is when. It was easy for people to say that because they thought we'll gain independence, or what, we will restore our independence on the 1st of October 2017. We are 3 years into it, and it's going to be longer. So we need to start thinking of creative ways of ensuring that our children get educated. Most countries, For countries that did not invest in the education of their children, that eventually got their independence, we can see the results. We can see what is happening to them. For countries that thought long-term and strategically and thought at some point we will achieve our independence, and by that point we need to have put in place a system that helps to educate our children in preparation for leadership roles. We are seeing it in countries like Namibia today and where they are. So we need to think very seriously about how we want to help our children to be educated and prepare them for the future which we cannot take away from them. And you cannot, we've seen it in South Africa, many of those who were part of the fight against apartheid ended up being criminals when apartheid got defeated because there was no framework put in place to prepare them to be their own persons when the time came. And when you grow up in a system that says, make the territory ungovernable, that's the only education you know. When you eventually achieve your independence, then that person continues with the same kind of education that you gave them, which is make the territory ungovernable. We need to think beyond that, and it has to start now. So yes, that's something we are thinking very seriously within SCCOP and how to move it forward. I know that there's been a series of efforts, consultations taking place, and we are hoping that at some point we will get some international partners who can help us with this. Finally, to the Amber Boys, and I think I've spoken to the general public, to the Amber Boys, we know that a lot of crime is being committed by boys sponsored by the regime, but we need to be on the watch out. We need to ensure that nothing under our watch goes in the way of crime, because history has taught us that any kind of guerrilla warfare that turns against its own people ends up being eaten. So it's important that we do everything to stop the kind of carnage, the kidnapping, the stealing, and even the killings that are taking place on our territory, sometimes being blamed wrongfully on our boys. We need to find a way of ensuring that the areas where we controlled are controlled in a manner that tells the world that we will be able to govern ourselves when the time comes.